Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs.
How are you, Ben? Have you done any gaming this week?
I've done gaming, but not any role playing, because Scott decided last weekend he had far too much exam and coursework stuff and marking that he had to do. So last weekend, me and Brian played some Fallout miniatures games. And then I went and played some Star Wars miniatures games, and me and Brian played some more Fallout and some more Star Wars. So I've done a lot of mini gaming, but yeah, no role playing. And I'll be the same this week, because Scott's like, I'm too busy. I'm far too busy with marking. So
far too busy. Okay. All right.
But we have done gaming. Yeah. How about you?
Good. Well, the same. I mean, I had we had Castles and Crusades, Kingmaker, and it was a good session. Actually, there was a lot of. It's possible and we'll address this today in our topic, but you know how it's possible to, as a player, a group of players, have players who they're at the same table playing the same game, but the extent to which they're actually playing it together varies widely. And Kingmaker, you get the best out of it if the players work together as players and have their characters work together as characters within the story. And it's a higher bar. If you want the quality from Kingmaker, it's a higher bar than a typical fantasy adventure. But we had more of that this last weekend, so that was really cool. It made me happy. And now what's crazy, because of schedules, we will play this weekend. And then next weekend, the weekend after that, we're going to do a one-off. And then we won't be able to play Kingmaker for over a month because of, I'm going to be gone. Other people are going to be gone, this, that, and the third. People going left and right. So we will take a break and then we'll come back and it'll be really hot outside and hot in my garage. So, so anyway, but it was good. It was good. But that gives us a good segue into today's topic. And which I have been thinking of, my working title internally has been "There, I Fixed It," as to what would we suggest? What do we want to see in terms of changes in D&D to make it good? I'd probably, maybe I'm taking your words here, but maybe you'd say make it better or make it good. I'm going to say make it palatable.
You played 5e for like a year.
Yeah, and I learned to loathe it.
See, I did the opposite, because I think when we got together, I was very much on 5e's rubbish. There's nothing good about D&D, and it's terrible. And then Pathfinder came out and just made me think even more that 5e was just rubbish. But then I played Curse or Castle of Strahd, whatever it's called, and really enjoyed it. But I think we enjoyed it in spite of the system. Yeah. That's not true. There's bits of the system I like, and there's bits of what they're trying to do that I like. I like the feel. I like the feel of the game. But it's nostalgia.
There is, it is. There is a nostalgia to the property, to the idea of the property of D&D. Yes. And that's why I've got this. The first edition PHB cover behind me. There's a powerful nostalgia to it.
Yeah, and there's something sort of warm and comforting about. I roll a d20 and I hit, and then I roll a different poly dice, and I do some damage, and you fight, goblins and orcs, and
yes,
there's some D&D monsters. And when I ran like our 3 GM campaign, I enjoyed, doing the stuff. And there is some good stuff in D&D. But yes. We know there's a new edition coming out. So I jokingly said to you, what would make you play 6th edition? And you were like, nothing. And then you were like, well, actually.
Yes.
And then we decided that was a good idea for a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, for at least my perspective on this is, some of these I'm pretty specific with, some of my wants. We can differentiate here. We could say, hey, you could take some of these fixes that we're going to talk about, changes, fixes, and use them in your 5e game to make it better. or make it more like what are 5, whatever. Or
I think I've got one of those that maybe you could do that with.
Is this the dream that, like, oh my, if I were in charge of WOTC, you know, like the WOTC president recently stepped down. So it's like, if I were suddenly president of WOTC, what would I do when it comes to D&D next edition?
Everything that I'm going to suggest is realistic. I don't think anything will happen, but that's mostly because I haven't really looked at what they're doing with like next. But my understanding is it's very much 5e with a few relatively minor tweaks. Doesn't even sound like as, you know, when we consider 2d20 and they've ditched the combat dice. Okay, the rest of the systems, basically the same, but that's quite a major. I'm not even sure 5e has anything like that. I think the system is basically the same. I think character creation is basically the same. I think to me, it's almost, you know, it's kind of like
Screw them. I bugger them. I don't care what they're doing. Let's talk about what we would do.
So it's like I think it's going to be more like 3.5, but because I haven't really looked at what they're doing, I could be wrong and they could be doing something amazing. And if it really is a 5.5, then that's fine. This is what I would want in 6th edition.
Yeah. I'm not even thinking additions. I'm just thinking this is what would need to be done to D&D to bring me back to it. Right. Back to it as a player, or a GM and a customer. All right, so system setting story. You want to start or you want me to start? Oh, I always think of it in that, you know.
But yes, you go, we go with our system stuff, and then you can waffle on about setting and story.
Okay, I don't have these in an order of priority.
No, I don't either.
For system changes.
What I thought of them.
But one of the major, I would like to see some significant changes to the magic system. Here's what I go back to. You know, we had, for the longest time, we had Vankian magic with, you know, spells that you memorize and then somehow forget, and it's supposed to take time to memorize them each day, and it becomes cumbersome and unplayable. And I think most people, in 1st edition and 2nd edition, how many of those rules were actually paid attention to with fidelity at the table? I've got no idea, but not in my experience. We introduced spell slots with 3rd edition and 3.5, and skipping over 4th edition and the powers and that kind of thing. We introduce. We are still with spell slots in 5th edition. And here's what I don't like. Okay, what I don't like about any of those is that under the hood, aside from a couple of tweaks like cleric domains and sorcerer spell points, and, you know, depending on which edition you're playing with, like, you know, wizard, you know, colleges or areas of magic, you know, aside from those and you know, warlocks and like how they function, aside from those couple of tweaks, and the warlock is really the outlier for those. Once you peel the layer of the class back, they're all the same. Spell slots have made them all the same. And so your divine caster who draws her power from Pelor, god of the sun, really functions the same way as, you know, Schlobdob the wizard who, whatever. It's lame. I think it's totally lame. And so one of the things that, you know, I think that D&D is obviously a huge nostalgia piece, and D&D has always been like the prime mover as being like, that's what people refer to when it's the Kleenex or the Jell-O of role-playing games. And so to an extent, I think a lot of systems over the years have taken their ideas and their limitations from D&D because it's the center of mass. One of the problems, I think that, you know, there are certain things about D&D system-wise just need to stay the same. Like, you need the 6 attributes. You need D20. You need armor class. There are certain things that just make D&D what it is. Don't bother changing them, or just tweak them a little bit. But one thing I've noticed about D&D over the years is that it really doesn't seem to take it doesn't seem to take into account the designers, like, what the hell is going on in gaming around it. Like, it doesn't take inspiration from other innovations and smart ideas and systems. So here's my piece on magic, and then I'll shut up. Castles and Crusades, the magic system as written in the player's handbook, is really old school and actually not to my liking. In the Castle Keeper's Guide, however, which, if you're not familiar with it, I've said this a few times, is not the DM's It's not the DMG. It's a book for GMs, all of which is optional. In the magic chapter in that book, they offer several different magic system options. They offer spell slots. They offer having to roll against a DC to cast a spell, which then doesn't put an upward limit on the amount of casting you can do per day. But if you fumble, if you roll a 1, you take damage. It offers, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but it offers several fundamentally different ways to manage the casting, the learning, the casting, and the accounting of spells. Like how much can you cast in a day and how often and that kind of thing. And D&D needs that. A cleric should not cast like a wizard who has spent a decade studying books, who should not cast like some dude who, because, some sorcerer who for some wild, like he got hit in the head and all of a sudden he can shoot fireballs. You don't know how, but he can. The magic should be different. And it doesn't need, you and I have talked about the lie of balance. I mean, work within a range. Like, don't try to, if the different systems are wildly imbalanced, fix it. But don't fall for the lie of like, we're going to make it all, look, if everybody's the same, there's no variety. There's no texture. There's no nuance. There's no difference. So personally, I would love to see, and this is what I'm doing in my Castles Crusades game, our sorcerer, which is a reskin of their illusionist, the sorcerer rolls to cast. And if the sorcerer rolls a 1, the sorcerer takes damage. But the sorcerer actually has no upward limit on spell casting per day. But any fumble causes damage, and the difficulty of the spell is based on the level of the spell. The sorcerer gains new spells on a level basis, like each level, similar to what D&D has always done, and it works. Our cleric is using spell slots. If I had a wizard at the table, I would pick something different. But I think that D&D needs different magic structures for the different classes. I think that would make them feel different instead of just saying like it's really the same. I mean, really, it would encourage different kinds of behavior and gameplay, and would open up new story options. And I think that would be interesting. So that is a huge, huge thing, and I think it's entirely doable. I think if D&D were to present that, and it worked in terms of the mechanics, people would accept it. But that's my first must-have.
Yeah, I'll stick on the magic one because one of mine is magic. I have to say I don't think I'd like the idea of having to. I mean, technically, a lot of the spells now you roll to hit because either you roll to hit or they save, but some spells don't. Well, I definitely like the idea of different casters working. For the moment, like you said, the only one that really is different is the warlock. The warlock functions very differently to the other ones. But all of the other ones, whether it's a bard or a druid or a cleric, they all work the same.
Yep.
That's not my main issue with D&D spells. Is I would like to see spells simplified. There are far too many spells.
Yep.
Most of them have way too long a description for basically the same effects. The amount of spells that essentially do the same thing.
It's an illusion. It pads the page count. It makes you feel like you have this great tome of stuff, but a lot of it is same. Yeah.
And some of them, are because they're iconic spells that I remember way back from when I read the basic book, and when you got the next one and it has something, a fireball, oh my God, it's so exciting. So some of these spells are iconic, but huge chunks of those spells, like you said, are just padding the workout. And most of them are so complicated. I wouldn't mind if there was as many spells there are now, but they were shorter. The description of fireball is this massive, big, long list, whereas all it needs to say is it's an area effect spell. It does fire damage. This is it. And they could all be universal things somewhere else. You just have a bunch of universal effects, and spells are made up of those and then the page count would massively drop because your utility spells are still, you need to write them. You need to explain exactly how that works. But a lot of the damage spells really just need to say it's a damage spell. It's either area effect, or it's a line, or it's single target, and that can be one word. And that
what
is
the type of damage? Is it fire? Is
and
it
what
cold?
the type of damage is, and that's it. And whether it's you roll to hit or they roll to dodge, that's all it needs explaining. Put a little bit of flavor text at the start of it, because that's one thing that is missing. There's no flavor text on any of those spells. All of the spells tell you rules wise. So actually, I said that your story and setting and talk about that is No, I'm wrong. You're absolutely right. You could put flavor text. If you look at like the monster books, okay, the monster manual, they have flavor text in them.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't the spells? I'd rather have a little flavor text for each spell, like either describing someone doing it or what it looks like when it happens, and then a very short description of how the spell actually works, and a lot less of them. I don't need that. And there's kind of things you can do. Like essentially, you could have keywords. If you had keywords that said damaging spell, single target, opponent, what's the save for them?
Ranged, whatever. Yeah.
You already have the start of the spell has like a whole bunch of things. They could add, you could so simplify spells. And instead they don't. They just have, that's what I would like to. I would like massively simplified spells and a lot less of them if they're just doing the same thing. I don't need 10 spells that all do basically the same thing.
No, and I mean, you could simplify it by, for example, like a spell that uses fire to damage. And I'm just making this up off the top of my head. You could differentiate that into two types. Either hell, you wouldn't even need to. You could just have a series of, what are the modifiers? Is it a touch attack? All right, you're touching someone and you're lighting them on fire. Is it like a reach? Is it ranged line? Is it cone? You just add those modifiers. You don't need a whole bunch of these different spells, but there's also got to be balance to nod toward the nostalgia and the history. Like you really, I don't think you can take Fireball out.
No, exactly.
But yeah, I agree. Simplify and streamline using keywords. That would actually make building different spells or modifying them. I think that would make it a little easier. But maybe they don't want you to do that. Maybe they just want you to buy their books.
Well, the thing is, in the player's handbook, massively simp down how many spells you have. In the Dungeon Master's Guide, give a bit more guidance to make spells using the keywords. And then you release a spell book, which would sell. So there you go. You can actually make more money than they make now, which I've got, I'm not against these businesses making money. If these businesses don't make money, we don't have role-playing games.
Right. We don't have role-playing games produced by these companies. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that, that never bothers me, but I don't like how many spells, because it's the thing that used to, and I think they may be fixing this in the monster manual, already have, when you see a monster as a DM and it has a spell list. And I'm like, well, I don't know what most of these spells do. I mean, as a GM, most players struggle, if you're a wizard particularly, or a cleric, even worse, most players struggle to know most, and they just do the same spells again and again and again and again. How as a GM am I meant to know, there's 20 different spells this guy can do? Right, well, I'll just keep doing that one.
Yeah. I think that going to like monster stat blocks, and that's a separate discussion. But yeah, that definitely.
No, I haven't even put that on my list. But yeah, it's the magic that bugs me. Go on, your next one then.
Magic. So my next one is meta currencies. Okay, DnD doesn't have one. No. It doesn't. Inspiration is not a meta currency. Inspiration is a status that you can cash in, or it is a status that allows you to throw one switch. Inspiration is binary. 0 or 1, and if it's 1, you can turn it to 0 in exchange for one thing, and that's it. It's not a meta currency.
Don't you just get
a meta currency?
Don't you just get advantage?
That's it.
And that's, I mean, so when you said earlier, they haven't looked at any modern things.
No.
Advantage and disadvantage, I think, is the one thing where they've gone, oh, actually, we're going to simplify all of this world of modifiers, and we will just have advantage and disadvantage.
It is such a generic Walmart vanilla version of it. It's crap. And why do they say it's so stupid that it's like, you have inspiration? Well, what does that do? That lets you have advantage.
Which you get all the time anyway.
You have advantage, you get to use it. And advantage is, I think advantage is a great example of an idea that a committee sat around and thought of. Like, we want it to be really simple, but it's so simple, it's stupid.
Yeah.
I think advantage is crap. Okay. I've played it. I don't like it. Here's what I suggest. Here's my more specific suggestion. Okay. And this is what I've been doing with Castles and Crusades, because Castles and Crusades lacks anything that even pretends to be a meta currency, which I think is an omission. Rather, it's a missing part. So what I've done so far, just to make my life really easy as a GM, is if my players roll a 20 in or out of combat, if they roll a 20, they have an option. Now, if you roll a 20 out of combat, I don't have any kind of house rule for you're really successful. You're just definitely successful. You automatic success with a 20. Okay, fine. But when you roll that 20, you have a choice. You can take one of two coins from me. They're different shaped. And one of the coins is an automatic success out of combat, and the other one is an anytime reroll. I just made this crap up almost on the spot because my players wanted a meta currency. I also award fiat coins, which are just +1 bonuses, and you can use as many of them as you want. You can have as many of them as you want. If someone does something cool or in game or out of game related to the game, I'll just throw them a coin. That's my pander to the GM, and I'll give you a coin. D&D needs a meta currency, and the easiest way, or an easy way, I think, to implement it using the current structure of rolling 1d20 is something like that. If you roll a 20, you can either, you could do one of two ways. You could either have the critical success, whatever that's supposed to be, like a crit in combat, or an automatic success out of combat. Or you can say, I'll just cash it in and I'll get this coin. Or you could say you get both, whatever. But there needs to be some kind of a meta currency that you can use to buy at different effects to shape die rolls, and maybe even to provide an advantage, little a, not big A, to you before you roll. And I take this, and I'm not shy about it, I totally take this from 2d20. Meta currencies ought to enable you to increase the likelihood of you being successful, but at a cost of this currency, and shape the outcomes of a successful roll. And D&D lacks that, and it needs it.
I agree with you, and I wrote down, because I wrote more interest in combat, and I said you either need a meta currency or you need an option list like Age has, where if based on the roll you get to do cool things with it. I don't, because you've only got one dice, I don't think you can link the meta currency to the die roll because it's so limiting. And if the only thing you do is when 20 already does something, I would simply add, like the vast majority of modern games, just have a meta currency that exists outside of the die roll that you can spend. Actually, the thing I would do, because D&D has all of these poly dice sitting around, I would just give players, in fact, the easiest thing to go is here we go. At the start of a session, you get one of each poly dice. You get a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, and a D12. And you can use them in the session or in the adventure, whenever the hell you want. And you can use that to add to a dice roll. You could use it to penalize a bad guy's dice roll. You could add it to a damage roll. And that gives you a nice, really easy thing. It's still on theme. Whether it's used for dice, for bumping your D20 or bumping your damage, wouldn't break the system. Right. I mean, obviously, you'd use your D12, but it works both ways. Yeah. Whether you can use it before or after you roll, it's irrelevant. It's not not a play tested thing. I think that's kind of something you want, because what you're wanting is because one of the things that is annoying about D20 is a good roll, a roll that's just over or just like miles over the target is irrelevant.
Unless it's a 20.
That's the fault of using a D20. When you're only using a single dice, you can do it. You can add in a whole bunch of things when you succeed by 5 or 10 or 15, and then it starts getting complicated. And I don't like that. And I also wouldn't want to have things on 20 like what's the one that I really can't stand that uses D20s? The cipher system. That has a really complicated, like a 20 is a crit, but also an 18 and a 19 are they're not a crit, but they.
I want to do.
I would separate the meta currency from the dice roll, because you've only got one dice. If you have multiple dice, like 2d20 works because you have multiple dice and you have multiple successes. So you can have degree. There is no degree of success in D20.
No,
and you can't fix that without changing the dice roll. In a system where you have degrees of success, you can generate extra. Or if you
ask people to do a lot of math at the table, which slows things down.
Yeah. So since you don't want either of those things, I think you just need a meta currency that just sits alongside.
You know,
I 100% agree that there should be a meta currency. But the other thing I'd like to is just more stuff, and it's difficult to have cool combat options. Again, it's the fact that you've only got a single success thing. Because of the age system, a good example. You roll 3d6, but one of those d6 does something extra if it matches one of the others. You can do that because you're rolling multiple dice. Like 2d20, you're rolling multiple dice, so you get to generate. You have degrees of success.
That makes sense.
So anytime it's very difficult with a D, but I would say 100% meta currency.
Yeah,
I would like more things you can do in combat other than being a Battle Master Fighter. Battle Master fighters are great. They're the interesting class to play in combat because you get to do all this cool stuff.
Yep.
Why doesn't every martial class get to do that cool stuff?
Something that you just made me think of with this idea of each, you get a heap of the dice, the different dice to use. You could tweak that maybe based on level. And I'm not going to offer up ideas. I'm just offering up this as an idea.
Yeah.
You could tweak the number and the types of dice you get based on level, maybe based on class. You could also make the dice that you could spend a die, not just like, oh, I'm going to add this die 8 to my roll, but you could cash in, for example, your die 8 for a specific kind of, if you cash in your die 8, you can knock an opponent down. So there could be a menu of momentum-like options that don't have a point cost, but have a die cost. So
you could actually link it back to what you said, where if you roll a certain roll, let's say 18, 19, or 20, for 18 and 19 work, because 20 already gives you, so 20 is a crit.
Yeah.
We know what a crit does. But then maybe rolling an 18 or a 19 gives you one of these dice. You get an extra one.
Like that. Yeah, there are options.
Anytime you succeed by 10, because succeeding by 10 is easy to work out. But so there are ways to do it. But
I don't like I hate to say this, but like I don't like making people count at the table. It's one of the reasons that like the age
that's why
system,
I say 10. Yeah.
Yeah, 10, but
10 is fine. But there's another one.
Yeah, so meta currencies is a must.
Yeah, I'd like to say meta currencies and things you can do with the meta currencies, because that's what
I think that's implied. Because if the meta currency, I mean, honestly, there's a difference between a meta currency and a heap of bonus dice.
Yes.
Bonus dice are not a meta currency. They're just bonus dice. And so I would actually like to see a combination of the two.
Because there are systems that literally, the only thing you can do with your meta currency is you can re-roll your failed dice roll.
And then you could roll worse, and that's lame.
That's not very exciting. So I want to be able to do cool stuff.
So here's what I've got next. Death and damage. I'm dropping.
You can't touch damage.
Yes, I can.
Oh,
currently in 5e, you have, and this has been, aside from 4th edition, when you take damage does nothing to you until it drops you. Okay, I'll come back.
Right, except for 4e. 4e was good for that.
I'll come back to that. Yeah. So 5 some odd editions of D&D, you could have 87 hit points, take 86 hit points of damage, and you are still perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And then once you hit 0, various things have happened in the editions, but currently 5e, you hit 0, you are unconscious and dying at 0. Okay, and then you have to make these death saves, which are just 50-50. Okay, putting aside the death saves, you don't die instantly until you take damage negative equal to your original max hit points.
Which doesn't happen very often.
It never happens, especially as you get up higher in levels. So I propose a change. I have a bunch of changes, but I have one change to that. I think, first off, you die when you hit negative constitution.
Yeah.
If you have 87 hit points by virtue of your level and your constitution and feats and this and that and the other, you already have the benefit of lots of hit points. You don't need to double that benefit and make you impossible. You're unconscious. You're on the ground and you won't die. Constitution, okay? Yeah. Constitution negative is instant death. I don't have, now when it comes to death saves, I don't have a specific idea about that, but I keep coming back to like, maybe those should be changed. My point is, death needs to be more realistic of an occurrence, because it needs to hang out there as a threat, because that shapes how people play the game. You make the game more interesting by adding some tension. And I think maybe just forget about changing death saves, just meaning like, hey, look, if you have a constitution of 12, if you go to negative 13, you are DED dead.
Yeah.
Boom. So my other thing about damage, and this was kind of bizarre that I had this thought, like I pretty much loathe 4th edition across the board, but bloodied as a condition, if you're not familiar with it, when you were down to 25% or fewer of your maximum hit points, you took on a condition called bloodied. And depending on the situation, depending on your character, depending on other things, that would affect you in some way or another. Okay. Here's what I propose to make life easy. And you could mark this on the character sheet to make it easy. It could just be a block on the character sheet where you have maximum. I think when you hit half hit points, you should incur some kind of a penalty.
Yeah.
When you again hit 1/4 hit points, you incur an increase of that penalty. And here's my option to make life easy. You would choose as a character. Maybe there'd be a menu like you suffer
cool.
a penalty to hit, which then scales as you drop to 25%. Or maybe you suffer a penalty to your armor class. Those are the two simplest ones. And I think that, I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that often in heroic literature and movies, when the hero and professional wrestling, when the hero is about to be dropped, that's when suddenly the hero becomes like most potent. So you'd say, wait a minute, when the hero's at like 10%, no, screw that. The more you get hit and the more you're bleeding all over the ground, the more it is going to negatively affect you. And I think maybe you could have a feat that would undo part of that. But I think that at 50%, you take a penalty, and at 25%, that penalty increases.
I 100% agree with you. That was one thing 4E did much better. But also in 4E, because it was a condition that was put in the rules, loads of the monsters had things that triggered when they got bloody.
Yep.
And so did some of the classes. So something like that, what you would really add in that would be really cool is if you're a barbarian, your rage would go up. When you're bloodied, you would do more damage.
Yep.
And when you are really bloodied, you would do even more damage. No one else would, but that would be the barbarian's thing, that they get to do something cooler as they take more damage.
So the problem is it seems to me like the mindset of WOTC now is like, well, if we provide that bonus to the barbarian when they're bloody, we have to provide a bonus. No, screw that. You don't. Yeah. Make the barbarian interesting by making the barbarian, letting it be different. I remember that half-orc characters in 4th edition had some kind of a blood rage, some kind of thing. When they became bloodied, they actually became more potent. That doesn't take away the effect that your hit points are still being attrited.
I definitely like that. It definitely is an issue that you have. Loads of people all about that. Hit points are this stupid thing that they're so, like you said, they're very binary and it's a bit boring.
Yeah, super abstract.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, on the subject of combat, my next one is I would like a better or more interesting action economy. I do not like you get one action, you get a movement, an action, and then you have a quick, free action or quick action or whatever. And then you have these classes that are like thieves where, they have to use their free actions all the time. And you have other classes that they never use their bonus action, is it?
Yep.
Some classes don't use bonus actions at all. Some class end up going, I'll use my bonus action to stab someone with my dagger because, it might hit, I might do 2 points, and they're just wasting time.
Yep.
The better version I've seen is what Pathfinder does, but it's not without problems because the three action economy works quite well. Like you can move and do 2 attacks, but the problem they have is that your second attack has a penalty. So then you start doing these things at -5. I'm going to do 3 attacks.
Ends up the
third attack is at -2. I don't like
the
that.
idea of Pathfinder's 3-point economy is good, but in very Paizo-like fashion is so fiddly.
Yeah. They could have just stuck with that, but I'd like a more interesting action. I'm quite happy. Spells take two actions. So if you're casting spells, that's just harder. You can have, like now you
could have some spells. You could have some spells that take 1. And you could have some spells that take 2, and maybe as you level, you could increase the number of spells that only take, like maybe you have a spell that you had for a while.
Something. Sorcerers would do something cool because now they can quicken a spell, but quickening a spell now is make it a bonus. But you have complicated rules now. You can cast 2 spells, but one of those spells has to be a cantrip, and one has to be. So if you just had you have 3 actions. You can hit someone, you can cast a spell, but most spells take two actions. You can move, give people, and then actually it does do other things. You would be able to, I'm going to aim and do this. You would straight away get more interesting things in combat by sticking to you have 3 actions. And again, it's one of those things that we're not talking about play testing this stuff. These are just ideas that I think the game would become more interesting.
Yeah.
And 3 is actually how many actions you get now in D&D, technically. The difference is 1 can only be used for movement and 1 can be only used for whatever the hell it says in your class. Because they just make it up as they go along.
I think that, and you again, you could solve the issue with, you could solve the issue by having a lot of A lot of the things that now rate as standard actions would cost 2.
Yeah, some of them, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm totally on board with that. All right. Here's my next. This is actually my last system thing.
Yeah, I've only got one more.
Excellent. Wow. It's almost like we planned it, but we didn't.
Well, so far they've kind of lined up in similar topics.
Great minds think alike. I would actually like to see, and I never thought I would say this, but I think I'd like to see some more feats.
A million miles off what I put.
Okay, now the feats in 3rd edition and in Pathfinder are, in my view, very granular. They're very like they're narrow, and there are a billion of them, and that's bad.
Yes.
The feats in 5e, I like how you have an option to take them, or you take the ability increase. I like that as a choice. And it will over time potentially provide some variety between characters. I'm not, I understand, like I look at the feats now cover a lot more territory. I'd like to see maybe some more feats to provide for a little more variety and perhaps come up with, and I think that you could do this within class archetypes. That you could, instead of saying, this is what you get, everyone gets this at 3rd level, everyone gets this at 7th level, provide a menu of options and essentially make those, because those are basically like feats as it is. You would then provide a little more variety. And even if you only had like 2 or 3, like instead of saying, oh, at 3rd level, the thief gets this. If you just had 2 or 3 things, you would have a little more variety between thieves. So that's how I would solve it, and I would just have some more of them.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially that is my 4th. I've put more character options.
Okay.
So the thing I don't like at the moment is exactly what you're saying. Is that class and subclass, your only option is subclass.
Yeah.
You pick a class, that's your class. You're stuck with that class now forever. You could multi-class, but then you basically give up your character being good at various points. And then you take a subclass and you are then stuck with that sub. And like you said, there are very few options. Now, okay, wizard, if you're a caster, you get to pick different spells.
Right.
And some of the, like if you're a battle master, you get to pick different, whatever the things the battle master.
But as a battle master, like a 13th level battle master, let's say you have a human 13th level battle master and another 13th level human battle master. Really, the only difference you're going to find between those is if the player of one chose to take feats instead of some of their stat increases.
Yeah. And
other than that, they're going to be exactly the same.
And that's why I agree. I mean, Pathfinder, I think, does go too far. I like the fact that in Pathfinder, everything becomes a feat. And what you can essentially do is swap out a class feat for like some other kind of feat. But then because you have all of these little, I mean, actually your feats are just replacing your class rules. And every class rule becomes a feat, which is a good way of doing it. But then they had to add in feats for your racial or species bonus. And then it's got a bit too common. I just want more options. So somewhere between kind of Pathfinders, everything is a feat, which actually does work kind of works, but maybe it's a bit too common. But it's a good idea.
Some things they work in theory, but then in practice they're too cumbersome. But that's Pathfinder.
Certainly the one thing that it does is that you could, like both me and Brian created fighters who were completely different in play because we just picked different feats.
Yeah.
And then like he chose to go into sort of a ragey thing and I went into having a pet. You can't do that in D&D. You can't take interest in things. Like I said, if you made feats more interesting, because the thing I think they did, they added these feats and they wanted them to be bigger. But then a lot of them I'm a polearm. The feats don't do anything interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love they took some of the class features back off them and put those into feats. So you go, I want a pet. Right. Well, that's a feat. You now have a pet. So now your fighter with a pet is totally different from the fighter without a pet because something like that.
They could solve this, and I'll end my piece on this with this. You could solve this by leaving the feats how they are. They don't even have to change the freaking feats. But what they could do is add more class options to still, like, a fighter's still going to be better at fighting and smashing things than a druid. Like in most cases, because that's what makes a fighter a fighter. But you need to have more variety and differentiation within that. I'm fine with the subclasses. I'm fine with the differentiation. Like a rogue thief, a rogue assassin. I'm fine with that. But there should be some more variety within those.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that you could do that by adding what effectively would be a menu of feats within each of those instead of just making them all the same by level. So that's all I've got for rules, actually.
No, that's mine too. We basically have the same issues.
There we
pretty
go.
Pretty much the same vague solutions, because funnily enough, we don't have thousands of people that are going to play test our suggestions for us.
No. Well, maybe we will after this. Who knows? We'll mention DnD and the hashtags and stuff, and it'll get paid attention to, because that's apparently what you have to do on YouTube. And I'll come up with a really clickbaity title also. So how about
D&D.
How about setting? Did you have anything to say about setting? Because I do.
No, because I was just looking at system, because D&D doesn't have a proper setting anymore. I mean,
and that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Here's my problem.
Go on then.
Back in the misty distant past, D&D did not have. It really didn't have a setting. Like first edition, the setting and first edition AD&D, the setting, the default setting developed long after the game.
Yeah.
And yes, there were plenty of adventures that were printed in what was known as Greyhawk, but the idea of this coherent, like, this is the setting and we're gonna place the stories inside it, but the setting precedes it, was a latecomer. That came years after the game started. The problem now is that they claim, kind of, that the default is Forgotten Realms-ish, but it is such a mushy, blah kitchen sink because they've poured everything into it that it means nothing. It's like, Syndrome. When everyone's super, nobody is. But the stuff, but no one's even really super. Nothing in that setting is super anymore because all of the uniqueness has been worn right off of it by trying to make it. It's like Rifts without like spaceships. It's crap.
That's not even my issue with Forgotten Realms anymore. There was a point, certainly end of second edition, that's what they did. You looked at the big map and it was everything in it. It's like Galarian and Pathfinder. Yeah. It's just such a ridiculous kitchen sink setting.
So it
doesn't even have that anymore. It's just bland now.
No, they just keep throwing like, oh, here's this new race and here's this new this, and it all fits. Everyone's there together. It's bullshit.
All they really do now is they just use this little bit of the Sword Coast, and it's just
right.
They don't even have interest now. At least other parts of the Forgotten Realms system, like Alcademia is interesting. So that place where like Hal Ruin is all the wizards. There were interesting places in Forgotten Realms.
So here's my proposal. What I think is that as the default, and this is my key here, the default setting, they ought to go back to Greyhawk.
Yeah, I know nothing about Greyhawk.
Greyhawk is like a Western European fantasy analog. You're not going to find a Dragonborn there. You're not going to find a Tiefling bard who is friends with the Birdman who lives in the flying castle or that crap. You're not. I think the default setting ought to be swords and castles and crap like that. Take it back to Greyhawk. And then write separate settings and sell them based on interest and things like that. Whatever. Settings ought to be distinct. Forgotten Realms should be like I remember when the Forgotten Realms box set came out, but a bajillion years ago, and it was distinct. And then it grew less distinct over time as they tried to pour everything to it. Eberron is distinct. Now, they wrecked Eberron.
That should be the default setting.
They crapped all over Eberron by saying, especially in 5th edition, by adding in everything else. This, like, everybody's here and no, make Eberron what it is. Like, I don't have any problem whatsoever. These bedwetters that are running WOTC right now who, we can't do Dark Sun because there's slaves. There are slaves in the real world. It doesn't make it right.
Yeah,
it's a freaking fantasy world. Like, you want evil, you have
one
to
of the things for me for that
things.
Is, yeah, exactly. You do Dark Sun and you have slavery in it because the point you're making out is that it's very clearly bad.
What a concept!
And therefore, you need to stop the slavery.
Exactly,
and that was the whole point.
Or whatever.
The main point of the Dark Sun campaign was overthrowing the Dragon King because they were assholes.
Yes.
And you were a slave and you overthrew. That was the main meta story of Dark Sun. To say we can't do Dark Sun because it's bad.
I think that there is. I've read tons of articles, and I think this, and actually a number of books that have done like business and economic studies of like why TSR imploded. You obviously can't have a bajillion different settings because no one's going to buy them all. But whatever settings are put out for D&D ought to be distinct. Like when I go have Indian food, it shouldn't taste like Italian food, which shouldn't taste like good Korean food, which shouldn't taste like a steak. You know, it's like, let's embrace the distinctiveness of these settings and not try to quietly make all of them everyone's welcome, every idea, every story, everything. That's crap. That's crap.
The thing
not
is,
a Vegas buffet.
They only release like 2 books a year. It wouldn't kill them to go, right, we're going to release 3 books a year. One book is going to be a setting book. The second book is going to be adventure set in that setting. The third book is going to be it's going to be one of these kind of set in its own setting and adventure at the same time, which they can do in their magic settings like they're doing. And there you go. Now, if the setting books would say, if they'd release setting books, well, they did, because like Eberron probably so. When they only released that few amount of books, they would sell.
I have no idea. I just my demand, my requirement here is that the settings need to be distinctive instead of these mushy amalgams, and that's what they need.
If you actually there is no Forgotten Realms setting book for 5th edition. There is a Ravenloft book. There is an Eberron book which has an adventure in it. There is a Dragonlance book.
Yep.
There's a Spelljammer thing. It's a box set, but there isn't actually a Forgotten Realms book. There is no setting at all in the 3 core books, and then they've released kind of bits and pieces, which
it's mentioned, and you have the campaign books that they've put out over the years. Like the first several years of them were all set, as you said, in and around the Sword Coast, but there was nothing that ever makes it distinct. So
I think they did that so you could run them in your own setting quite happily, which potentially worked. But when they don't try anything different, you think like, well, you definitely don't want. The thing is, just release a setting book and then just release you don't have to keep supporting them. Like you said, the problem with TSR is they were trying to support all of these different setting lines.
And Eberron, I mean, they put out the book and that's it.
Yeah.
They have not put out anything else.
Stick to that. But I totally agree with you that when they release something like Eberron, don't try and make everything from the core. Well, if everything from the core book can't finish settings, then your core book, it doesn't matter. You just you can't play
one of
those
the things that was and I'll end with this. Previous versions of it, all versions of Eberron, so 3.5, 4.0, and 5, they've made mention that anything that's in the regular monster manual or regular PHB has a place in Eberron. Okay. However, and this is the older Eberron you get to, they did this best with 3.5 and they've since watered it down progressively. That thing takes on potentially a very different role in Eberron. Hobgoblins are there and elves are there, but they are very, very different.
Yeah.
And that distinctiveness, that's what we need. That's what makes a story interesting. Not everything being lukewarm oatmeal, which is what all of it is now. And that's it. So story, actually, you know what? I don't have, like, in terms of modules or adventures or whatever, I don't have any. I think that if settings were more distinctive and the rules were different in the way that we propose, I think that the game would be far more interesting to play, and the stories that you would come up with would be far more interesting and compelling because the settings themselves would be interesting and compelling.
I think it would be nice if that they kind of went back to having essentially the modules. I don't like the fact that the adventures take you from level 3 to level 10 to 15.
And 10 months.
And they're big, and you basically have to be doing them constantly. Because I buy, and then some of them they link to a setting. So they might have like a little bit of setting that seems quite interesting, and then this big adventure, but then the setting isn't enough to play in that setting afterwards. And then most of that thing, is adventuring. Why can't we just have some smaller adventures? Just pick a setting and release a couple of small adventures during that year of different levels, and maybe they can be tagged together. Not just like Act of Cthulhu do. They do both. They do small PDFs,
boom,
and they do the big ones.
And so does Star Trek Adventures. Star Trek Adventures has released. They have released some books of adventures. They have released some, call them like multi-session, call them full-length modules, and they've also released a heap of these mission briefs only digitally.
Yeah.
Achtung Cthulhu recently took a number of their digital adventures and printed them in hardback volumes.
There you go.
But that would actually, yeah, that would work. And here's the other thing too, is that WOTC owns all of TSR's IP. So they have a metric crap ton of modules, many of which are good, some of them are not, that could be, you could take the story and you could translate it. Now they've done that, like, you know, the, what's that book? Tales from the Yawning Portal. You know, they did that. But I think you're right, actually.
There's a couple like that.
These giant $50, $60 hardback volumes that take forever, and lots of people don't ever finish because they are so damn long. And there's a massive burden on the GM too. You know, this is a whole nother topic, but we talk about like the bottleneck on D&D play is DMs. And maybe that's why WOTC is trying to, you know, leverage AI and other BS like that, because that's of course, you can't make the AI buy your books. So that's beside the point. We all know that the GMs buy the most stuff. But when you get a 200 and some odd page book that in order to run well, you need to read a few times over, that's a big freaking burden. A 32-page adventure module, like it was way back in the olden days, was really easy to consume quickly and run. So maybe them, instead of trying to only do a handful of big things per year that are high dollar, maybe they do things that are just purely digital products, smaller in scope. They turn back to these old adventures. They don't have to worry about necessarily creating new ideas, because there's a lot of stuff that they could jumpstart a process with this. So I'm on board with that. I like that as a story option.
There we go.
I think we solved it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to do a write-up of this. I'm going to do a write-up of our ideas, and I'll share it with you, and we can make that available to people. We can link that, and people could look at it. And if you're listening, you should give us your ideas of how to fix D&D, how to drag it out of I don't know, it's so blah now, which is just so sad, because it used to have distinctive edges. There used to be contrast in the stories, and now there isn't. It's just blah.
Well, I think part of it is, like you said, because there is no setting, and the settings they try to make the same as the other settings. So none of the settings are really, some of the settings that are interesting is some of the settings that are from Magic the Gathering, because they don't have all of the races from the player's handbook. They have whatever
they
races
keep trying to
they made up.
They make a distinctive setting, and then they say, oh, but all the other stuff's available there too. Bullshit. Just say no.
Just say exactly. Just say, well, this stuff isn't. Here, these new weird races, these are in it. This is a new weird setting, and then we're going to do some adventures for that weird setting. But they don't do that.
Yeah, and if look, let's face it. If someone at home is like, well, screw that, I want to have Dragonborn. Why you would want to have Dragonborn? Dragonborn are like the worst, but that's beside the point. The stupidest race. Anyway. If one setting is like Dragonborn don't exist in this setting, there's nothing to stop Timmy the DM from saying they do in mine. But what I would like to see is the official products, like, again, establish and maintain some distinctiveness in the settings. And then by extension, the stories you tell within them. Like, don't have, like, I can't, anyway, never mind. Bitch and moan. I'm sorry. There, I fixed it.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, so now people, you're supposed to like
and subscribe. Join the conversation.
Join the conversation
on the Discord.
That's right, on the Discord. And you know what, too? I've been really, and point downward, and I've been really happy, actually really happy of late with more people are leaving comments on the YouTube channel, and there have been some little conversations going, and people have been
I have missed that.
Well, you should.
I don't get notifications. Well, so I don't get notifications, so.
Well, you should subscribe to the channel, and then you would see them. They would pop up when you see new stuff there.
I am subscribed to the channel, but that's not how it works. I get notifications of just comments in video.
Okay, I'll see if I can figure out a way to add you to that. I don't know how. And if you know how and you're listening, why don't you tell us? All right, cool. That's beautiful. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.